This is one of those stories that's funny to hear about until you actually have to deal with them. This is the story of a total loser with a god complex. But just before we get into that, thank you to today's sponsor, Ghostfire. Magic is a staple of the fantasy genre, and what's more magical than the Magic Store? I helped Ghostfire write their new, vibrantly illustrated anthology. Over 250 pages of more than 15 unique magic items, stores, and traveling traders. Filled with a treasure trove of new magic items, this book makes it easy to reward your characters with captivating ways to spend their hard-earned gold. Designed from the ground up to be full-blown adventure locations, each shop is filled with compelling quests, adventure outlines, and encounter prompts to make trips to the store more than a simple shopping trip, turning the boring shopping session into the epic shopping adventure. So if you want a book bursting at the seams with stores, equipment to fill your players' pockets, and enough adventure to set it apart from everyone else, do check out the link in the description. See you there. The pandemic was just beginning, and I've been studying Greek mythology in school for a class. It gave me the idea to run a 3-shot campaign online where the party was fighting their way out of the siege of Athens, fighting Greek gods and creatures all along the way. Loosely based on 5e, but with a Greek mythology skin over all the regular stats. The campaign was going to be very combat heavy, and I was going to DM over Discord. The party consisted of 5 people, although this was 3 years ago now, and I don't remember everyone's classes. I would DM, and I set the campaign to be 3 very tight quests, each with enemies specifically tailored to whoever the players picked. The first 2 were simple regular classes with no struggle in the setup. They came with some idea of who they were and what they wanted to do. The third one I'll call Work Friend, because we worked at the same place. He will be more important later, but his character creation went as smoothly as the first 2. The last 2 I'll call D and J, his significant other. D wanted to make the entire campaign about himself. He added 8 different, distinct hells, each with their own lore and backstory, and he was the king of all of them at one point. Yes, he was a level 3 chaotic neutral wizard. Eventually, the gods of the other hells banished him to live as a human in Athens because he was just too powerful to kill. In fact, he tried to write it in the backstory that he was too powerful to ever die, and that he could tap into his latent powers and just chooses not to rise up and kill the 8 lords of hells who imprisoned him, because he became bored with beating them. He wrote me 6 pages of backstory and hid a ton of loopholes in there, none of which remotely related to Greek mythology. This reminds me of when I was a kid sword fighting with sticks in the backyard, and there was always that one kid. You know, that one kid. Like, whenever you'd hit him, he'd be all like, nuh-uh, I have a bulletproof cream, so actually, you didn't hit me with that stick like you just did a second ago. So now we all know where that kid went when he grew up. He's still doing the same thing in D&D. Very sad. Reality aside, this is something that I've never understood. When you're playing D&D, you're telling a story. So why would you show up with the whole story already written? I'm not against backstories or anything, but anyone can see that this is just too much. It feels like his big adventure already happened. When my group writes backstories, we can include action and a cool past and all that, but we also tend to leave it unresolved so that they can unfold it and build on it in the game, so that while the campaign progresses, their character grows too. But of course, that's not the worst of this guy's problems. Roll post. Now at this point, D had been my friend for 7 years or so I let a lot of this blatant shenaniganery aside. I worked with him, saying that the 8 hells were in another universe, and that his powers simply didn't work as long as he was in the Greek god universe. He fought me on every compromise, but in the end he ended up with a character who was only a little overpowered, and still a massive edgy narcissist. Now, D was annoying, but he was at least invested in his character. I couldn't be too mad about that. J was a different story. Before we talk about J, I want to address what the DM just said. Honestly, I agree. I don't have that big a problem with min-maxers in my campaigns. One of my favorite players had a character that was the leader of combat. He would lay out all the battle plans and was the most effective in a fight by far. Definitely unbalanced, but in every other conceivable way, his character's life was a mess, and he was very good at role-playing it. It was a cosmic irony that he was so great at combat because he couldn't kill any of his real problems with a blade. It's a hard thing to pull off for sure, but if you can make it work, it's amazing. Anyways, I'm rambling. J and D had just started dating about 3 months before this, so I didn't know J that well, but I thought this would be a great opportunity to get to know them. We hopped on a call to discuss their barbarian. In character creation, they only ever responded with one-word answers. They clearly did not have any interest in the campaign or the game at all, but they insisted that they really wanted to be there. I offered to let them just spectate as an animal in the universe that could follow the party out of the combat but in the game world. They would have the option to hop in as their character if they thought it looked like fun, but it wouldn't be necessary if they didn't feel comfortable. They insisted on being a full member in the party. Confused, I decided to prioritize them a bit to see if I could interest them in the campaign. The only thing I got from Jay was that they wanted to wield an axe. That's it. That's a great way to introduce someone to the campaign, and one that I will probably steal if the opportunity ever comes up. But I would tweak it a lot. Let's say we have a new player, never played D&D before, but wants to join our regular group. Well, that session, the regular party would have a quest to transport an exotic pet to its owner. Unfortunately, bandits waylay and harass them, so it becomes a high-stakes escort mission. Now, the new player gets to play the game as this exotic pet creature, helping the party in combat and getting to do some fun, low-key, non-verbal roleplay. In my opinion, it would be a great first step into roleplaying, which is usually the hardest barrier for new players to break, and they would get to fully experience the game. In my opinion, that's an S-tier way to introduce someone to the game. Role post. After the call, I created a relatively linear campaign where they could go in any direction and encounter something that someone in the party was good at fighting. The first creatures they'd encounter were cursed tree characters, who Jay in particular would have an advantage at fighting with their only character trait, which is having an axe. I even redrew the world so they would be almost certain to run into them first. I also found some Greek myth that involved a minotaur and an axe, which led me to make him the final boss of the first session. Killing the minotaur would leave a better axe on the ground for Jay as their main loot. I tailored the whole first session around bringing them in and making them feel included. This hits an important note that doesn't get said often enough, so here goes. I've gone on record before saying that the DM is the person most responsible for how much fun people are having, and that is still true, but it's on the players to take what the DM is giving them and make a complete game out of it. It doesn't matter how good the DM is. If you get players like this who just go limp at any sight of gameplay, it's going to be terrible. There's already a lot of pressure on the DM to perform, so please, a little enthusiasm wouldn't kill you. A month passed and the first session date rolled around. I had everything, 7 or 8 maps with an interactive FOW layer in Photoshop. Every NPC had at least one image. Every player had at least one encounter they and they alone would have an advantage for. It was balanced for 5 people. The first 2 and work friend showed up on time, but no word from D or J. We message them, nothing. We call them, nothing. If this happened to me again today, I feel I'd be better at coming up with a new starting position on the fly, but back then I felt I needed all 5 players to start, so we waited. An hour passes, another hour. Two of the players open up Smash, and I go back to my books trying to see if I could salvage the campaign. D and J wake up and pop into the server as if they had just stepped back from the bathroom. 2.5 hours late to a 4-hour session. By the time they got there, no one wanted to play, so we decided to kick it a week. They both gave me a half-hearted apology, but I know D, and I could tell he wasn't actually sorry. He didn't care. And he was actually coming off as annoyed that I was frustrated. Whatever, I accept the apology and just ask that everyone be there on time next week. Another week goes by, and this time I message D the day before with a reminder of the date and time of the campaign. He says that he and Jay will be there. 6 hours before the campaign, work friend says that he won't be able to make it. He claims that work came up and he has to go in. He and I worked at the same grocery store for a while. I'd been there for 5 years, and they had never once done something like this to me. But whatever, things come up. Work friend doesn't owe me an explanation. I wish he wouldn't have lied to me, but at least he gave me enough time to rebalance the characters. So I'm scratching my head trying to rewrite the map when Jay messages me out of the blue 30 minutes before the start. Hey, I'm not coming to your campaign today. Honestly, I just think you're a shitty DM and I don't want to play. I answered politely, but I was losing it behind the keyboard. If they didn't want to participate, that's fine. But they insisted on playing. If they had been on time to the first week, if they had given the first session a chance, they would have seen that a ton of the enemies were tailored specifically to their character. But they never gave me a chance. They were still my friend's partner, so I bit my tongue hard, but I was livid. I was pissed that it totally deflated me just before the session started. This is an unexpected turn of events. Who could have foreseen that the bad player doesn't like the good DM? Wow. In all seriousness, this is a thing that can happen. Bad people take and take and take, and the minute they get an inch of pushback, they magically transform into a victim. It's hard to watch a DM try so hard to make the game work, only for these guys to just step in and take a wrecking ball to all of it. I reworked the enemies I made for Workfriend and just cut all of Jay's enemies entirely, leaving massive areas without an encounter. D shows up, only 20 minutes late. We started the game, and even though the other two players kept complimenting me on the Photoshop and map work, I'm just disheartened. The problem with D as a player is that he breaks all the rules, but never the same rule twice. Rolled a 19 off screen? I'm sorry, won't happen again. Killed a character someone else in the party was preparing to kill instead of the obvious threat he was squared up against? Oh, I'll talk to the team next time. For the remaining 3.5 hours, he pulled this death by 1,000 cuts garbage. D tries to get up and walk back some of the changes to his character that we made together in the character creation, giving himself way more power than he actually had. He continuously tried to use spells and weapons I told him he didn't have access to. At one point, he said he had a blood sword that he could summon by cutting his arm. That would be overpowered. No, use the regular sword you have in your right hand. He then pulls out the 6-page documentation of his backstory and points to him using the blood sword. I pull out my copy of his documentation and remind him that that had been crossed out in red ink for being too powerful. When it wasn't his turn, he would be playing Dark Souls, and every time I came back to him, I had to re-describe the scene and list off the things he could do. At one point, I told him that if he wanted to just go play Dark Souls, he was welcome to, but he apologized again and opted to stay in the game. After that, when it wasn't his turn, he would mute himself and still need a refresher whenever he came back. The Minotaur was still the big bad of the first session, but I didn't get a chance to rework it to be weak against any of the remaining characters. D charged the Minotaur because he, quote, wanted to get this over with. I took an inventory of the room. The other two players were bored out of their mind because D was making it impossible for anyone in the party to do anything. And I was miserable for all the reasons above. Everything says the Minotaur should have wiped him and the fight would have continued for another half hour, but I was just done and wanted to log off. The Minotaur dies. Wow, that was easy. I guess I'm god of this realm now. Huh. What? No. What the actual hell are you talking? Whatever, sure. The session ended there and we never had a session 2. I felt like a really bad DM because I spent the entire time entertaining D and his power fantasy, and in the end I don't think anyone had fun except probably D. I think that's why the work friend made up the story about needing to leave. He just didn't have the heart to tell me. That was the last time I ever played with D, and it was the last time Jay ever talked to me. We were at the same party and D swore I didn't piss him off, but Jay just never looked at me again. Aw, shucks. D and I cut contact about 4 months after that, when he blew up at the entire group about his Taco Bell order or something stupid. Apparently, at some point in another campaign, he tried to pull the same God power BS again, at which point he was quoted as having said, yeah, in case you haven't noticed, I have a bit of a God complex. Straight up saying the quiet part out loud. He makes every game about himself and is a nightmare to play with both as a player and as a DM. As of now, 3 years later, I'm still only friends with one of these 5 people from this party. I know I'm not perfect, but I really try to put an effort into my DMing. Since then, I've run some amazing campaigns with a much better group. I regrew my confidence as a DM, so I'm glad I didn't quit entirely from this. D stands for douchey. I couldn't agree more. It's tough hearing about how hard the DM tried to help this guy and keep the peace, but it does take 2 to tango. If someone's intent on being as difficult as possible, there's nothing you can really do to get them out of their own way. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this little story. Till next time.